Have you ever asked yourself what's the best decade in human history? Well, I have, and I believe it to be the 1990s, and for good reason, other than the fact that it is, of course, my childhood. Welcome back to another Let Me Explain video, folks, and today I'm going to be breaking all the rules of the scientific method by essentially starting with my conclusion, in this case being I think that the 1990s is the best decade in human history, and essentially working backwards from there to prove it. For the sake of time and focus, much of this video will be focused around the country America. Obviously, they have a lot of data that represents all aspects of their lifestyle, so they're a very easy country to cover. So a lot of the things I'm going to be referencing and points that I'm going to be making are going to be very much looking at it from the American perspective. I'll be breaking this down to basically 6 categories that I think kind of encompass all the different aspects of life that you want to measure when talking about the quality of living. And those 6 categories are economy, conflict, health, technology, entertainment, and culture. And so without further ado, let's get started. Starting off is number 1, economy. So the 90s were very much a decade of economic prosperity when it came to the United States. So specifically, the country grew its economy by 4% year by year between the years of 1992 and 1999. And for reference, it never grew that much in any one year from the years of 2001 to 2015. Unemployment dropped from 8% in 1992 down to 4% by the end of the decade. Median household incomes grew by 10% all the way from 1990 through to 1999, as opposed to in 2015 it hadn't grown at all since to the year 2000. The poverty rate peaked at 15% in 1993, dropping down to 11% by the end of the decade. Meanwhile, stocks had quadrupled and the Dow Jones was up over 300%. Number 2 is conflict. So this is a big one. The main thing that happened in the 1990s was obviously the collapse of the Soviet Union, which put an end to all the nuclear tensions that were going on up until that point. The apartheid state in South Africa was dismantled, and Israel and Palestine did agree to a coexistence of sorts. Obviously, there's always war going on in the world somewhere at some time, and I don't want to be dismissive of any of those. So, I will give mention to obviously the Gulf War. You had the Yugoslav conflict going on, which was horrendous. Then you have the Kuwait, all those sorts of things going on. There was definitely conflict, don't get me wrong, but I just, you have to step back and I guess compare it to the likes of like a World War I or a World War II. And, when you compare it to those sorts of things, it doesn't measure up, but they are still terrible. Any sort of conflict is bad. It's awful stuff. But look, if we're going to compare it to the other decades surrounding it, obviously the war in Iraq in the thousands, and before that you had like the Cold War, Vietnam, all those sorts of things, nothing to that sort of scale. The third category is health. So when it came to this, obviously the 80s was a big decade for HIV and AIDS, which was, a new thing that kind of came along that was turning into an epidemic of sorts and even a pandemic. By the 90s, it was slowly getting under control. So that is a good thing. It was still prevalent, don't get me wrong, still very much around, but they were starting to get on top of that. And, when you talk about at least current times, we've just gone through a pandemic. There was nothing like any of that that's come along throughout the 90s. So definitely when you look at it from a, all around perspective, the 90s compared to other decades was definitely nowhere near as bad when it came to that global health issues. Number 4 is technology. And this is a big one because this is one I'm quite passionate about. Technology in the 90s was very much, present. We had the internet, it was there, it served its purpose, which was limited, at least compared to today's capacities. Other than that, you have the likes, there's electricity worldwide. It's not an issue, particularly in the developed world. But then, you look at just our access to music and movies. To me, it was a golden period because we had perfectly, great access to those things, but they weren't all consuming in our lives. They weren't there and always at our fingertips, which brings me obviously to phones. Mobile phones did exist. Communication was there. It was present, email, all of that. But the idea of it always consuming our lives, being in our hand and in our pocket at all times, wasn't there. Social media, ironically, it's there to make us more connected, but I feel at times it almost makes us further apart than ever. So all the methods for communication, with technology and all the great aspects of technology were there, talking about air conditioning, or everything from big to small, all of that was all there, manufacturing, but it wasn't consuming our everyday lives at every minute, and our lives weren't built around them. I feel like now we work for our phones instead of our phones working for us. So that's a big one for me, because I hate that we're all on our phones now all the time. It's destroying society, if you ask me. But yeah, it's like we had what we needed and we didn't realize it, but we needed to keep pushing, and now we are where we are now, with where it's just all consuming our lives. Number 5 is entertainment. This is obviously my most passionate one because that's the one I talk about the most on my channel. And yeah, I mean, entertainment, if you ask me, was as diverse as ever. I mean, look at films. I mean, you have everything from the kind of cult classics to Pulp Fiction, all the way to the big blockbusters of Jurassic Park and everything in between. I mean, it was top quality for all types of genres in the 90s. You had the comedies, you know, the likes of Jim Carrey dominating the scene and Adam Sandler. Then you have in the action realm, you've got the Bruce Willises of the world and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Stallone, all of those guys. And then you've got, you know, drama. So there's so many, there's something for everyone when you ask me when it came to film. It wasn't all consumed by just superhero movies or just big blockbusters. There was everything you could find in the 90s. It was all there. And yeah, it was great film all around. And even more specifically within film, the 90s definitely represents the Disney Renaissance. I mean, obviously it started in the late 80s with The Little Mermaid, but you just see what they released in the 90s, from The Lion King to Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, and then obviously with their Pixar releases starting with Toy Story. That was their golden era. I mean, it was the biggest era they had pretty much since they had started back in the early 1900s. I mean, it was the golden age for Disney, at least particularly compared to now as well. So they were going through an absolute renaissance, and it was fantastic stuff, and animation was just hitting a new level. And speaking of golden ages, I mean, on the TV side, my God, the sitcom era was just unstoppable in the 90s, from Seinfeld to Friends, Frasier, everything between. The Simpsons. I mean, that was the absolute golden age for comedy television, sitcoms, the best era, if you ask me, easily, of television. And I mean, that the 90s very much encapsulated all of them. And even with music, you know, you had a whole new genre basically making its way in the form of hip hop. And, you know, that carved out a whole new fan base within music. And that was incredible. And then on top of that, do I even have to mention the Harry Potter novels? And with the 6th and final category is culture. I mean, this is the most important one if you ask me, because back then we knew who we were as a people. We understood, you know, the ideas of being patriotic to your country whilst also being sympathetic to others and issues that might be going on in theirs, you know. And then look at the family unit aspect. You know, we believed in the idea of the nuclear family, but also understood that there might be groups that do things differently, whether they be of different, you know, sexual persuasions, genders, or races, whatever that may be. We understood and respected those, but we also knew what is the right way to do things, like from just a typical perspective, you know. And then when it comes to minorities as well, we understood and appreciated that they existed. We didn't tailor our whole world view or policies and everything just to catering towards smaller minorities. Instead, we just followed the rules that we knew to be true, that allowed for them to also participate in normal society. So there you have it, folks. That's my reasons for why I believe the 90s is the best decade in human history. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you have a different opinion? Do you have a different decade in mind? I'd love to hear your reasons as to why that might be. But just to me personally, I mean, I'm definitely biased here. I grew up in the 90s. It's when I was raised as a kid. I love that era. I think there's so much good that came out of it. But there are plenty of other great decades too. Like, I look at the 80s very fondly, the thousands too. And I'm sure there are others, you know, well before I was born, that are great too. But I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. And we'll talk to you next time. Bye.